What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have Yamblehovich, 28 wins and 8 losses, defending his UFC light heavyweight championship against Glover Teixeira, 32 wins and 7 losses. This fight is taking place at UFC 267 on October 30th. And, who would have thought just a few years ago when we had Jon Jones basically running roughshod on a division of, we'll say, declining legends, Rampage Jackson, Shogun Rua, Chuck Liddell, and so forth. Who would have thought that in 2021 we would have a 38-year-old Yamblehovich battling it out with a 41-year-old, soon to be 42. Glover Teixeira is going to be 42 by the time he steps in the cage to challenge Yamblehovich. Who would have thought that this would have been the championship fight scenario? But here we are, and it's not for lack of huge runs made by both fighters. Both Yamblehovich and Glover Teixeira are on 5-fight win streaks. And can you believe that Glover Teixeira is about to have his 21st fight in the UFC? Not MMA career, but just in the UFC. Like, I swear, it seems like only yesteryear. I mean, it was 2012 when he made his UFC debut. And, just before that, they were like teasing the idea of Glover Teixeira, who was involved in Brazil Chuto at the time. He couldn't get out of Brazil, but they were teasing the idea of this, little known, but very known among like the hardcore fans, Glover Teixeira possibly making his way to the UFC to perhaps challenge against then champion Rampage Jackson. And we are now 21 fights later for Glover Teixeira. Like, time really does fly. But if you look at Yamblehovich and his improbable run to the UFC light heavyweight title, I mean, you really have to tip your hat to him. And you have to tip your hat just as much, if not more, to Glover Teixeira for getting back to a title challenge. Like, Glover Teixeira is already challenged for the UFC light heavyweight title. He fought Jon Jones back in April of 2014. We're talking UFC 172. After starting his UFC career 5-0, Glover Teixeira challenged against Jon Jones, lost via unanimous decision, lost his very next fight, also via unanimous decision, this time to Phil Davis, and then he won 3 against Elvin St. Preux, Patrick Cummins, and Rashad Evans. And that Rashad Evans fight, by the way, was a huge win for Glover Teixeira because he won that one via knockout. And if you look at his 3 setbacks since that knockout of Rashad Evans in 2016, his 3 losses were against Anthony Rumble Johnson, where he basically suffered a punch, a knockout punch that was on par, as bad as what Francis Ngannou did to Alistair Overeem. It was basically viral before viral, where, when Glover Teixeira got knocked out by Rumble Johnson, you actually saw like a tooth of his fly up in the air. Like the camera caught it, and you could slow it down and replay and see the little tooth fly up in the air. And I mean, this was one of the more nasty one-punch knockouts you could imagine. And so by that time, you're thinking, Glover Teixeira then is in his like mid to approaching late 30s. It's like, how much more, tread does he have on the tire, especially after a brutal concussive knockout like the one he suffered against Rumble. But after he fought Rumble, he wins one against Jared Cannonier, and then he loses to Alexander Gustafsson in a fight where Gustafsson was basically boxing Teixeira's ears off, like pillar to post. He was just on the move. He was like looking like one of those round-winning boxers operating behind a jab, shooting his uppercuts. And by the way, remember, it was an uppercut that Rumble hit Glover Teixeira with, but Alexander Gustafsson doesn't hit as hard as Rumble, but he was also rocking Glover Teixeira with that uppercut. And again, he was just boxing circles around him where Glover Teixeira is trying to cut the cage off, but, and he did have some success in spots, but Gustafsson was winning every round and eventually stopped him in the 5th round. And the beginning of the end for Teixeira in that fight was 3 consecutive uppercuts, like 1, 2, 3. Like, it wasn't uppercut, other hand, another uppercut, other hand. It was 3 consecutive uppercuts with the same hand. I mean, that's how much, or should I say, that's how often Glover Teixeira was getting hit cleanly by Alexander Gustafsson. So by that point, since he had now been knocked out 2 out of his last 3 fights, you're really wondering, how much does Glover Teixeira have left? But then he beats Mirko Serkinov, and then he suffers his final loss to this point, and that was against Corey Anderson in a fight where he basically got dominated first in the stand-up in the first round, where Corey Anderson was just catching him cleanly, outboxing him, and then he started taking Glover down. Now, Glover is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialist. Like, he's one of the best out there, and Corey Anderson, with the wrestling background, was able to take Glover Teixeira down pretty repeatedly, and I was wondering if, Corey Anderson was going to gas. He gassed a little bit in the final round, but he pretty much cruised to a 3-round decision win against Glover. So now Glover at this point has lost 3 out of his last 5 fights. And remember, 2 of those were via knockout. But then he goes on this 5-fight win streak and he beats Carl Roberson. And, the quality of competition as Glover Teixeira is winning each of these last 5 fights, we're pretty much getting better and better. You start with Carl Roberson. Okay, that's cool. But then Ion Cutelaba, okay, also cool. He won both of those via decision. But Cutelaba obviously has holes in his game. But then Glover Teixeira beats Nikita Krylov and then Anthony Lionheart Smith and then Thiago Santos. Now, the last 2 wins for Teixeira were after the start of COVID. So he beats Anthony Smith to no crowd, where you could basically hear all the punches. And you could hear, this was one of those fights where they were really criticizing Anthony Smith's corner for sending him back out there. Because, Anthony Smith, in fairness, fought this fight against Glover Teixeira as if it was a 1-rounder. He emptied the clip in the first round, and he hit Glover a lot. Now, again, Glover had been susceptible to knockout, so I get why you would want to make some clean, hard contact with him, but it's damn, save something for the second, But it was apparent that at the end of the first round, you're just wondering, damn, is Anthony Smith does he still have enough cardio to keep going? I mean, this is scheduled for 5 rounds. Well, Anthony Smith ended up receiving the beating of a lifetime, where the vet, Glover Teixeira, starts taking him down, just mercilessly ground and pounding him, but even kind of telling him, hey man, it's just a part of the game. And you could hear this because, again, there's no crowd, but that's the type of pummeling that Anthony Smith was subjected to against Glover Teixeira. And it went on, again, 3rd round through the 4th round. It should have really been stopped either in the 3rd or in the 4th, but it was eventually stopped in the 5th. And obviously, Anthony Smith has done a lot of fighting since even that brutal loss. But very good win for Glover Teixeira, because his very next fight was against a Thiago Santos, who was coming back from a brutal knee injury that he suffered against then-champion Jon Jones, when, Thiago Santos in that fight became the first to actually win a scorecard against Jon Jones. So Jon Jones beats Thiago Santos via split decision. But Thiago Santos basically tears 3 of his knee ligaments in the 2nd or 3rd round, but is somehow able to persist and continue fighting for the rest of the fight. And keep in mind, this is a title fight, so this is a 5-rounder, and Thiago Santos ends up going the distance with Jon Jones, with at least 2 of those rounds fighting with torn ligaments in his knee and still keeping it competitive. Very odd and interesting fight, but it would be a long time before Thiago Santos would return to the cage. But when he did, it was against Glover Teixeira, and Glover Teixeira almost got stopped in the first round against Thiago Santos because of Santos's very aggressive but ambush style of striking, where he comes in kind of hot but in spots. Not too dissimilar from Yamblehovich, but I don't think Thiago Santos was fully recovered from his brutal knee injury. So after he almost stopped Glover Teixeira, dropped him twice to where the second knockdown in the first round, Glover Teixeira face plants and is just scrambling, trying to get a hold of a leg or something. Eventually does, basically starts ground and pounding the hell out of Santos even before the end of the first round. And then the second round was way brutal for Thiago Santos. And Thiago Santos actually had a little bit of success in the 3rd round against Glover Teixeira, dropping him again. But again, he couldn't stop Glover Teixeira, because Glover Teixeira, aside from those knockouts that I described earlier, is pretty damn durable. We're now against Anthony Smith, against Thiago Santos, and in other fights. We've seen Glover Teixeira multiple times in deep trouble, but then able to recover, grab a leg, get on the guy's back, and just start ground and pounding him to hell. Really taking him in the deep waters, testing his ground game, testing his cardio, and basically putting that veteran light heavyweight body and experience on the opponent until he either submits him or ground and pounds him to a TKO victory. Well, against Thiago Santos, Glover Teixeira finished the former title challenger via rear naked choke submission in the third round. It was just a torturous experience, it looked like, for Thiago Santos. Not as torturous as the Anthony Smith against Glover Teixeira fight appeared to look, but Glover Teixeira is really just out experiencing a lot of these very good strikers who are able to hit and hurt, but not able to finish Glover Teixeira. So now Glover Teixeira, it was a long road to get back to the title contention, but here he is fighting the new champion, who now has at least one title defense under his belt against Israel Adesanya, who is stepping up from middleweight, still currently the middleweight champion, but trying to become champ at light heavyweight as well. Yamblehovich basically turned that back. The first 3 fights were very competitive, but Yamblehovich scored 2 very crucial takedowns in the 4th and 5th round and basically won via unanimous decision, keeping his title that he won in a vacant title bout against the favorite in that fight, Dominic Reyes, who most believe should have actually earned the light heavyweight title against Jon Jones. Very close fight. Jon Jones was awarded the decision win against Dominic Reyes, but then later vacated the title, which made it up for grabs for Dominic Reyes versus Yamblehovich. And after a very interesting kind of tit for tat, Yambojovic is a very patient striker with, again, an ambush style where he'll throw like 1-2 punches followed up with a kick to the body that was just scoring hugely against Dominic Reyes. You can see the purple welts on the side of Reyes. Yamblehovich ends up catching and hurting Dominic Reyes and then stopping him via TKO in the 2nd round, earning him the light heavyweight title. Now, that kick to the body, I just want to say, he'll have to be very careful trying to do that against Glover Teixeira, because Teixeira is going to be looking for those types of opportunities to then maybe catch a leg or just keep the leg for long enough to get Blachowicz off balance, maybe take him down, ground and pound, win the round. But Yamblehovich won't be able to use that end of the combination kick to the body against Teixeira with impunity in the way that he was against Dominic Reyes. But like I said, Yamblehovich had a hell of a run to the title, because for most of his UFC career, he was looking like a formidable foe, but somebody who was certainly beatable. I mean, at one point, he had lost 4 out of 5 fights. He had lost to Jimmy Manawa via decision, Corey Anderson via decision, and then he beat Igor Pokrajak via decision, but then he lost the next 2 fights against Alexander Gustafsson via decision and Patrick Cummins via decision. So what does that tell us? That says that, okay, you could win a round against Yamblehovich, but he's obviously tough to finish, right? Because even out of that 4 out of 5 fight losing streak, he wasn't stopped once in there. So then he goes on and he wins his next 4 fights against Devin Clark, Jared Cannonier, and then against Jimmy Manawa and Nikita Krylov. 2 out of those 4 wins came via submission. Those were against Devin Clark and against Krylov, and then via decision versus Cannonier and Manawa. 4-fight win streak, and then he has a pretty important fight against Thiago Santos, where it's kind of a battle of like top 5-ish contenders, where it's kind of a crossroads fight. Thiago Santos versus Yamblehovich. Very competitive first round, very competitive second round. I mean, both of these guys, like I said, are kind of ambush style fighters where they're patient. Yamblehovich a little more patient than Thiago Santos, especially in this juncture of Santos' career. He was still the sledgehammer, pretty damn aggressive. Whereas in his last couple fights, he does seem like he's dialed it back a bit more. I don't know if he doesn't have as much confidence in his cardio, in his legs, given the knee injury, or I don't know what the deal is. Could also be age. He's almost 40 himself. Definitely late 30s, Thiago Santos. But, he ended up catching Yamblehovich in one of these ambushes in the 3rd round, and he actually finished Blachowicz via TKO. Again, crossroads victory where Thiago Santos would end up getting a title shot versus Jon Jones. Yamblehovich kind of has to get back, to the back of the line. Not all the way in the back, but a few notches back, where he then goes on that 5-fight win streak that I just described, which included the title win against Dominic Reyes for the vacant belt and a title defense against Israel Adesanya. That was his very last fight. But the 3 fights before that were the road to the title challenge. And those wins came against Luke Rockhold, where he just knocked Rockhold the hell out. Rockhold really doesn't seem like he belongs at 205. But to be honest, Rockhold hasn't seemed like prime Rockhold for several years now. I'd argue around the time he messed around, got careless, and lost his title against Michael Bisping, I haven't seen Rockhold look the same. I mean, he was looking decent in the early rounds against Yoel Romero before Romero knocked him out cold. But now we've seen Rockhold get knocked out cold a couple of times. One against Romero, and then obviously against Yamblehovich at light heavyweight. That was Rockhold trying to go up, saying maybe 185 middleweight doesn't work out. Maybe, light heavy is the weight class for me. But Rockhold's not nearly as mobile as he used to be. So, we weren't sure what to make out of that win for Yambojovic. And the same applies to his very next win, which came against Ronaldo Jacare Souza, who was himself going up and experimenting at 205, but was truly a 185 former title contender. Not challenger, he didn't fight for the title, but he was basically like the number 2, number 3 contender. Basically his big loss that took him out of immediate title contention for Souza came against Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker stopping Souza was one of the biggest wins of Whittaker's career. But Souza also didn't really belong at 205. He lost via decision against, again, the very patient striker Yamblehovich, who basically outboxed him for 5 rounds while being able to avoid Souza taking him down, going for submissions, choking him out, anything like that. He was able to keep that fight on his feet, and that's key. I get it. Souza is not as big and is not as tested at 205 as Glover Teixeira is, but the fact that he was able to keep Souza having to engage in a stand-up affair, that's what I'd imagine Yambojovic wants to do with Glover Teixeira as well. Keep this thing in the stand-up. Although I do think that the threat of his strikes can potentially create opportunities for Blachowicz to take the superior ground fighter Glover Teixeira down if he needs to catch his breath, or he finds himself hurt, or he just needs desperately to go for a takedown. I'm not ruling that out. That can happen with Blachowicz taking Teixeira down. But for the most part, I think he's going to want to keep this in the stand-up. But his next win, and which is his final win before fighting for that vacant title against Dominic Reyes, came against Corey Anderson. Again, another crossroads fight. This was basically a title contention fight, just like the one where Blachowicz was fighting against Thiago Santos. But this one, again, came against Corey Anderson. This was after Corey Anderson beat Ilir Latifi, and he had knocked out and upset Johnny Walker when Johnny Walker's name was just surging. But same thing, ambush style, and Corey Anderson is now about to fight for the title in Bellator. He's been looking like money in Bellator. Just got a huge win against veteran Ryan Bader, former multi-divisional champ at Bellator. Never was a champ in UFC, but he had a pretty good career in the UFC too. But Corey Anderson, when he was fighting Jan Blachowicz, he just got caught, and he got caught early, and he got knocked out by Jan Blachowicz, who just a very deceptively quick. He's got pretty quick hands with his ambushes, pretty damn quick, and he throws kind of pre-programmed combinations where he knows when he's coming in, he'll think left, right, left, kick. But it's basically like a punch and kick pattern that he already knows what he's going to throw. The question is, are you, the opponent, ready to take his incoming fire? It could be a 3-strike combination, could be 5 strikes, could just be a 1-2. But Blachowicz fights at a pretty measured pace, but when he goes for it, and he got Corey Anderson out of there. And again, after that, he fought for the title, won against Dominic Reyes, and then defended it against Adesanya. So what do I expect to see with Blachowicz versus Glover Teixeira? This one's interesting because if you look at Glover Teixeira's resume, besides the fight against Thiago Santos, who, again, I'm not sure yet if he's nearly damaged goods, but he hasn't fought too many patient ambush style strikers. Now, Anthony Smith is a pretty damn good striker, as is, Corey Anderson, but I think Corey Anderson's actually improved a lot in the stand-up since his fight with Glover Teixeira, which, again, Corey Anderson won, but won it mostly through wrestling as much as through the stand-up. If Jan Blachowicz wins against Glover Teixeira, it's going to be mostly through the stand-up, I'm suspecting. So there isn't really anybody on Glover Teixeira's resume who has a similar skill set as Yamblehovich. And similarly, there's nobody on Yamblehovich's recent opponent schedule that had the same skill set as Glover Teixeira, where they just are basically just super durable and they can knock you out. Like Glover Teixeira does have hands and he has scored knockouts, but he is willing to just go through hell. He's willing to suffer more than most of his opponents. I believe that that's truly one of the secret sauces to Glover Teixeira's success. As Dustin Poirier put it after the trilogy fight with Conor McGregor, he just is willing to suffer more. And suffer he might have to. Like, I'm trying to picture when the fight starts and they start off in the stand-up, like how patient will Glover Teixeira be? Because whereas Blachowicz is a patient striker, ambush style, I kind of paint Glover Teixeira as being a pretty patient hunter. Not too patient. He wants to cut the cage off and he wants to let his hands go and maybe go for a takedown, punch, 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 grab you, and then push you up against the cage, drain your energy and stuff like that. Is he going to be able to cut the cage off against Blachowicz, where Glover Teixeira is then able to use his physical strength, make things uncomfortable for Blachowicz, maybe steal the first or, at least a couple minutes of the first round by just having Blachowicz's back up against the cage, where Glover Teixeira can, threaten a takedown, foot stomp, just do all of the tactics that make for a grind you out type of fight, to where when they enter the second round, Blachowicz might be a little tired. But again, Blachowicz doesn't really exhaust his gas tank. He fights at a measured pace. So something's got to give. Teixeira's trying to kind of press the issue, trying to cut the cage off, trying to make this a battle of attrition of sorts. I think that Glover Teixeira is going to get caught hard before Blachowicz gets caught hard. I think he's going to get hit cleanly, but I think he's going to survive the first attack. I think he's going to make it out of the first round. But in the second round, if Glover Teixeira is getting pasted up in the second round and is unable to go for the takedown that at some point he might desperately need, then he makes himself kind of a sitting duck. Now, I don't know if he's going to be caught that vulnerable, even though we've seen him that vulnerable against, again, Alexander Gustafsson. Different styles between Gustafsson and Blachowicz. I mean, Gustafsson was on his bike, kind of circling, sticking and moving. Blachowicz is kind of like a step back, move, maybe throw one strike out, leg kick, but then is looking for his boom, boom, like pretty much proceed with caution when you're trying to close the distance against Blachowicz. But I do think that Teixeira is going to go to the well one too many times, and I think he's actually going to get stopped in maybe like the third or fourth round. So I actually have Yambojovic, the champion, defending his belt successfully for the second time, but this time via mid-round to late round, fourth round, TKO stoppage of Glover Teixeira. That's at least what I think is the most probable scenario here. But you know what? I mean, if Glover Teixeira, and I'm not going to count him out here because his 5-fight win streak has been so improbable. If Glover Teixeira doesn't come out of this one successfully, I think that this could be a potentially a retirement fight for Teixeira. If not a retirement fight, then at least a fight where it's like, okay, he might want one fight after that to win so he could go out on a winning effort, maybe something like that. But I mean, he's obviously scaled the mountain one more time. And again, I did not think that he was going to make it back to a title fight. I didn't think that was in the cards for Teixeira, especially after I saw those stoppages against Rumble Johnson and Alexander Gustafsson. But if Glover Teixeira wins the title at 42 years old against Yamblehovich, who, again, is no spring chicken himself, he's 38 years old, so it's going to be interesting to see how the tactics will weigh on each other's gas tanks. But if Teixeira wins, that'll be one of the most improbable things in UFC history. Even if it doesn't come against an opponent who's as like elite or all-time conversation level as like a Jon Jones. So it's not like he's beating one of the all-timers. But I think Yamblehovich is pretty much establishing himself as a credible champion, not just a champion who got lucky in a couple. I mean, it's hard to win a title, obviously, but you've had certain champions who have, for instance, defended their title multiple times. At this point, Blachowicz has only defended his once. But I think that with the win over Glover Teixeira, it is no longer a is he really a champion type of thing with Yamblehovich. I mean, I already don't really look at him as that type of champion, but some still kind of do. But a win over Teixeira in this case, now you've got 2 title defenses, you got to give the guy, some props at some point. But yeah, let me know who you think is going to take this light heavyweight title fight between Yamblehovich and Glover Teixeira. Again, a very improbable road for both guys to meet at this point for the title. But here we are. Please leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.